Mitchell Hoover, the 2023 World's Strongest Man, has just released a video confessing to his steroid use.
I'm going to up my dose of testosterone from 500 milligrams a week to 750 milligrams a week. I'm going to stick at 300 milligrams of NPP. I'm going to add in Halo. I'm going to add in Anadrol 100 milligrams a day.
As we'll soon see, the way he couches his confession is very strange. But it's helped me understand something about Mitchell that's puzzled me ever since he weighed in on my critique of Mike Israetel's doctoral thesis.
Recently, there's been a lot of chatter online about Dr. Mike Israetel's PhD. The critique by Solomon Nelson is this: his dissertation wouldn't pass at a top-tier university. The research Dr. Mike did isn't rigorous, and really this shows that he's not qualified as he says he is.
At the time, I didn't feel that Mitchell's video was worth addressing. However, now that we have his equally bizarre steroid confession, I feel that we can finally put the pieces of the puzzle together. They paint a picture of a man who says things for convenience rather than because they're true or meaningful. Let's start at the beginning and find out if anyone is at home. Chapter 2 of this video will provide an overview of Mitchell's attempt to run cover for Mike Israetel, and Chapter 3 will dismantle it. Chapter 4 will then provide an overview of Mitchell's steroid disclosure, and Chapter 5 will critically analyze it. Finally, I'll conclude in Chapter 6 by connecting the dots between both controversies to show you exactly whom we're dealing with. In Mitchell's video, Dr. Mike's PhD is Fake, My Take, published on the 5th of October 2025, he effectively argues that if a person is useful enough to enough people, then the validity of his or her credentials becomes irrelevant.
So whether you're a great PhD or a bad PhD in the eyes of academia are pretty irrelevant to your professional standpoint, your professional success. In fitness, we don't need a word salad behind our names. We need educators and we need practitioners. We need people who can take knowledge, gather knowledge, interpret data, and turn it into something you can use at the gym. But contribution is what actually matters to people. It's what actually changes people's lives.
Mitchell doesn't defend the actual content of Mike Israetel's dissertation from any of my criticisms. He doesn't attempt to prove that the statistics in Mike's dissertation are correct. Instead, he argues that the truth of the dissertation matters less than the utility of the person holding the degree.
Even if his dissertation really was the weakest academic paper that you've ever seen, does that actually matter to the lifter who just wants to know how many sets of bench press to do per week? Never mind if you have rounded correctly and consistently, or if your statistical analysis was as good as it could have been 13 years ago. It does not matter one iota.
Mitchell notes Mike's since retracted claim that the document hosted on the university server, the one containing statistical impossibilities, is merely a draft.
Dr. Mike has since made a video talking about how this was just an edit, a draft of his dissertation. It was finalized afterwards.
From there, Mitchell moves to a broader philosophical defense, the nihilism of credentials. Mitchell recounts his own academic experience, describing classes he took like beekeeping as contributing to his useless word salad and marketing.
In my undergrad at the University of Guelph, I took beekeeping for a semester. Beekeeping added to my useless word salad. It's good marketing for me to say I have a master's degree and for Mike to say he has a PhD.
Mitchell posits that degrees are often hollow formalities that confer an air of superiority rather than genuine capability. In this way, Mitchell attempts to lower the stakes of Mike's specific academic failure by devaluing the entire academic system.
Well, they've done an undergrad, they've done a few tests, and they've done a few weekend courses. And for whatever reason, this gives them an air of superiority. And maybe this person is brilliant, and it's entirely possible, but the letters don't prove that. That's the problem. Academia, it rewards publication, and it rewards jargon, but it rewards intellectual gatekeeping. The real world doesn't care. The barbell doesn't care how many letters you have behind your name.
Finally, Mitchell contrasts the dusty PDF of a dissertation against the millions of YouTube views and thousands of lifters that Mike has allegedly helped.
What actually matters more to the world? What's actually worth talking about? The dusty paper in the university library? It's probably not in the library, it's probably just on a desktop somewhere. Now, what matters more? the dusty paper in a university library, or the lifter who finally understands how to train intelligently thanks to YouTube videos.
Mitchell lists legendary coaches like Louie Simmons who had no degrees, arguing that contribution outweighs credentials.
Contribution, in my opinion, always outweighs credentials. Now, here's a list of people in the strength world without a strong, formal academic background that you might recognize a couple of these names. Louie Simmons, who invented the conjugate method and built Westside Barbell. All people with no letters behind their name, just experience, common sense, really good principles.
The core of Mitchell's defense is that because Mike supposedly provides good advice now, the fact that his academic foundation might be empty is a nitpick that we should ignore. Mitchell frames my critique as a cancer of gatekeeping that threatens to tear down a net positive force in the industry.
So in this video, I want to break down what the critiques actually are, why people are even bothering to nitpick a dissertation from more than 10 years ago from someone doing good work right now. There's a cancer in the science-based lifting community, and honestly, it spreads to academia in general. People fall in love with whatever word salad it is behind their name. Academia, it rewards publication and it rewards jargon, but it rewards intellectual gatekeeping.
I'll now address Mitchell's argument point by point.
A dissertation is essentially a long paper written to prove that you can do research. Generally, you're looking at some novel phenomenon and trying to explain that. It's not required that it changes the world.
I actually agree with Mitchell on what the purpose of a PhD thesis is. Mitchell's correct. A PhD thesis doesn't need to be a masterpiece. It doesn't need to win a Nobel Prize or rewrite the laws of physiology. Its purpose is to demonstrate that the candidate is competent enough to conduct valid scientific or scholarly inquiry. However, Mitchell is arguing against a straw man. I never claimed that Mike's dissertation had to change the world. I never demanded that it be the next theory of relativity. My critique isn't that the paper failed to change the world. My critique is that it failed to prove that Mike can do research. If the purpose of a dissertation is to provide proof of competence, then Mike's paper provided the opposite. When candidates submit data with mathematically impossible standard deviations, implying negative ages and heights, and other rampant errors, they haven't demonstrated that they can do research. They've demonstrated that they can't do research. Mitchell also claims that a dissertation investigates a novel phenomenon. Well, Mike's work failed here too. It didn't investigate a novel phenomenon. It was a derivative study that told us stuff that we didn't ever have reason to doubt. But even if we ignore the lack of novelty, the hundreds of basic errors alone disqualify it from satisfying Mitchell's own definition. It was supposed to be proof of ability. Instead, it stands as proof of inability.
If you want to contribute to the world, how on earth is diving into the smallest of minutiae useful whatsoever? The amount of research versus the amount of application of said research, it has a massive disparity.
This minutiae argument is baffling in the context of Mitchell defending a supposedly science-based figure. Mitchell is arguing that academic research is too specific and minute to be useful. If that's true, then why does Mike Israetel brand himself as a scientist? Why is his company called Renaissance Periodisation? Periodization is a scientific term. You can't have it both ways. You can't trash the scientific method as useless minutiae and then charge people money because you're the science guy. If the science is useless, then at least be consistent in that stance and stop using the label to sell products. As the top comment on Mitchell's video reads, if Mike's PhD is so unimportant, then why is it being used in all his branding and the titles to all of his videos?
In my undergrad at the University of Guelph, I took beekeeping for a semester. Beekeeping. Beekeeping added to my useless word salad. It's good marketing for me to say I have a master's degree and for Mike to say he has a PhD. In fitness, we don't need a word salad behind our names.
When Mitchell cynically reduces a PhD to good marketing and word salad, he's projecting the fitness industry's shallow grift onto the rest of the world. He wants his audience to believe that because he views academic titles just as a branding exercise to sell hypertrophy templates, that must be all they really are. He's essentially telling his audience, we use these impressive titles so you won't question our authority, but please don't look too closely at how we actually got them. Mitchell seems to miss the implication of his own argument. If he genuinely believes that advanced degrees are nothing more than useless word salad designed for good marketing, then he's confessing that he and Mike amount to charlatans. He's confessing that they use titles they consider to be hollow just to extract money and trust from their audience. It's an accidental admission that their academic authority is a calculated sham.
Einstein's dissertation was on calculating the size of sugar molecules in water. Nobody talks about it and nobody cares. We remember him for the theory of relativity, not for sugar water.
Maybe Mitchell doesn't remember Einstein for his PhD thesis, but plenty of scientists do. Einstein's doctoral thesis was incredibly influential, with over 5,000 citations. But more to the point, if Einstein's dissertation contained data saying that 1 + 1 = 3, then he wouldn't have got his degree. Nobody is asking for Mike's dissertation to be famous. We're asking it to tackle a worthy topic and to be valid in doing so. In that respect, it failed comprehensively, yet Mike was still conferred his doctorate. Is that not worth discussing?
The whole academic world has lost the plot. This is the cancer of science-based lifting that Mike Israetel is now at the mercy of. Someone's dissertation wouldn't pass at Harvard, so they can't make YouTube videos giving advice? Really? Really?
Mitchell says someone's dissertation wouldn't pass at Harvard, so they can't make YouTube videos. Who said that? I didn't say that. This is just a straw man. For all I care, Mike can make as many YouTube videos as he likes. But if they proffer garbage, then no PhD will persuade me that the garbage is science. Straw man aside, Mitchell calls my critique cancer. I'd argue the opposite. The entire point of science is that it's self-correcting. Peer review, criticism, and checking calculations are how science stays healthy. If you denounce scrutiny because you like the person, then that's when the real cancer starts. That's when you get gurus and cults instead of educators.
Let's take this hypothetical person, John Smith, CSCS, CPT, CNC, PES, CES, FMS, USA Weightlifting Level 1, NASM Certified Personal Trainer. What has this person actually done? Well, they've done an undergrad, they've done a few tests, and they've done a few weekend courses. And for whatever reason, this gives them an air of superiority.
Mitchell mocks trainers who list a dozen certifications to sound superior. Mitchell doesn't seem to realize that Mike Israetel is doing the exact same thing, but with a PhD. Mike uses that degree to, in Mitchell's own words, project an air of superiority over other coaches. Mitchell is mocking the John Smiths for doing the same thing Mike does, just on a smaller scale. If credential flexing is bad, then it's bad for everyone. Indeed, it's even worse with a bogus higher degree like Mike's.
Authority is not granted by titles. It's earned by the quality of the information that you put out.
If authority isn't granted by titles, then why does Mike insist on using the title? Why is his handle Dr. Mike? Why is the PhD the first thing mentioned in his bio? The unfortunate truth is, authority is granted by titles in the marketplace. Mike even admits as much himself.
Dr. Mike, geez, that's a big deal. And I've noticed that carries a lot of weight. So for me, only by signaling, if only by signaling, my PhD was a really good idea.
That's why people pay more for a PhD coach. If Mike truly believed authority came only from information, then he'd drop the doctor and compete on a level playing field. But he keeps the title because he knows it grants him authority that he didn't necessarily earn. On this topic, consider Mitchell's own YouTube bio. He introduces himself to the world like this: the world's strongest man. More importantly, a master's degree, exercise physiologist, looking to spread the motto, lift heavy, be kind. Mitchell presumably brandishes the master's degree in his bio to validate his brand and legitimize his authority. How do we reconcile this with his claim that authority isn't granted by titles? Mitchell can't argue that higher degrees are just meaningless word salad while leaning on his own master's degree to give his platform its advertising luster. Which is it, Mitchell? Is the degree just a meaningless piece of paper, or is it supposed to mean something? Where's the integrity, Mitchell?
Louie Simmons, Mark Israetel, all people with no letters behind their name, just experience, common sense, really good principles, solid foundation, and some of their own personal research that they didn't need someone to tell them to do while they held their hand and asked them to report when they were done. So how do we judge someone in this space?
Louie Simmons never asked anyone to call him doctor. He stood on his results. Mike isn't like Louie Simmons. He wants to be seen as Louie Simmons plus Einstein. He wants the street cred of the gym and the prestige of the academy. If Mike wants to be judged like Louie Simmons, then he should drop the academic pretenses. But as long as he claims the academic rank, he's subject to academic rules.
If you haven't changed your mind about something in the last 10 years, you're not growing. And I assume Dr. Mike has done the same because that's what growth looks like.
If Mike had truly grown, then he'd look at his old work, admit the errors, and issue a retraction or a correction. That's what an honest scientist does. Coming up with a bullshit wrong draft explanation when his work gets exposed and insisting that I did the expose in bad faith doesn't look like growth to me.
Now, what matters more? The dusty paper in a university library, or the lifter who finally understands how to train intelligently thanks to YouTube videos? To me, that's the difference between credential and contribution.
Mitchell wants us to believe that Mike's contributions, and we'll get to those, somehow render his academic shortcomings irrelevant. Why can't we have both? Why is the one at the expense of the other? Why is the bar so low that we have to accept bungled statistics and hundreds of other basic errors just because Mike's YouTube videos might be entertaining or helpful? Mitchell's ultimate defense is the idea that Mike Israetel is a giant who's left the fitness field stronger than he found it. He specifically praises Mike for creating frameworks that simplified hypertrophy.
And the question of contribution is, have you actually made the fitness community better? Have you taught people things that have improved their training and their approach? And have you left the field stronger than you found it? And by that measure, Dr. Mike is a giant. He's made hypertrophy training principles accessible. He's given people frameworks like volume landmarks that simplify a really complex science, and he boils it down into a way that's really easy to understand.
I disagree strongly. I believe Mike's pseudoscience has misled millions. Consider you should probably train more than the pro bodybuilders you follow.
You should probably train more than the pro bodybuilders you follow.
Or how about, if you're getting stronger week to week, then you're under training?
If you're getting stronger week to week, you're under training.
Striated glutes aren't unhealthy.
People see striated glutes and they go, that can't be healthy. And I would love to be in real life with that person instead of over social media and say, okay, no, I hear you. Why not?
What of his debunked volume escalation model? Or his app telling you to add sets if you're not getting soreness or a pump?
If you get no pump at all from your training, man, the app's probably going to tell you to do more sets because this is not enough.
An idea that has zero scientific backing. And how could we forget about muscle soreness from soccer causing a ton of muscle growth?
If we go now and play football, soccer, and we run for like 10 minutes, I will be insanely sore the next day. My lower body, my adductors, quads, hamstrings.
They're growing.
Are they?
A ton.
Or the curl fly press. Obviously, a full audit of Mike's bad advice is outside the scope of this video, but we don't need to drink the entire ocean to know that it's salty. So when Mitchell states that Mike has contributed to the field, I have to ask, is convincing untold numbers of natural lifters to wreck their progress by chasing soreness and raising their volume for no logical reason a positive contribution? Or is it just a sophisticated way to confuse people while selling them the solution? Mitchell Hooper ends his defense by asking, why are we even talking about this? He believes that because Mike is a net positive for the fitness industry, a claim I strongly disagree with, we should overlook the cracks in his foundation.
The real measure of anyone in fitness isn't their academic paper trail, it's the quality of information they share and the impact that they have on people's lives. If that's the case, then why are we even talking about it? Why are we looking at it? Why are we critiquing it? Why does it matter?
This matters because words have meaning. When you place PhD after your name and doctor before it, you're making a specific promise to the consumer. You're promising that your authority is derived from rigorous, verified work. Mitchell Hooper has inadvertently admitted that for many in this industry, that promise is a sham, that the degree is just good marketing. And I think that's worth talking about. Having dismantled Mitchell's defense of Mike Israetel, I'll now turn my attention to Mitchell's recent PED disclosure. In his video, World's Strongest Man PED Stack Reveal, published on the 24th of March 2026, Mitchell publicly discloses the exact performance-enhancing drug regimen he used to win the title of World's Strongest Man, alongside an even heavier PED regimen he plans to use for the upcoming Enhanced Games.
It seems right. So, to win World's Strongest Man, simple as this: 500 milligrams of testosterone a week, 300 milligrams of NPP a week, 100 milligrams of masteron a week. That's it. Now, coming into Enhanced Games, I'm going to do a few extra things just to see, can I get the most out of my body? I'm going to up my dose of testosterone from 500 milligrams a week to 750 milligrams a week. I'm taking 60 milligrams of Adderall. I'm going to add in Halo. Halo can be really good for strength, 50 milligrams a day. I'm going to add in Anadrol, 100 milligrams a day.
Mitchell frames the disclosure of his steroid stack as part of a much larger philosophical discussion about health optimization and medical ethics.
This is education, and education that I think is really important, that could really help someone's health. But one thing that I've always found interesting is, when does illness begin and when does loss of optimization end? Because those things are not the same.
Over the course of his 17-minute video, Mitchell frames his disclosure as a necessary intervention.
This is abrasive, this is difficult, this is a risk for me to talk about, but I don't understand why I do something and be half transparent. I joined the Enhanced Games because I'm sick of half transparency and pretending that things like this don't exist.
He argues that the pervasive secrecy in strength sports compounds the danger of the drugs, driving young athletes to unregulated black markets and reckless, excessive dosages because they have no honest baseline to learn from.
And without talking about it, how is anyone going to know what anyone's doing other than what their friends are doing? All of these people are getting it from black market sources that are not safe. And that's a whole other issue to talk about.
Mitchell builds a narrative that his participation in the Enhanced Games isn't just about athletic vanity, but rather a pioneering contribution to medical science.
And that's what Enhanced is trying to do. Not for me to get a wonderful record, but for you to improve your health, improve your energy, optimize you. That question can be answered if you have a research study with participants, which is what Enhanced is doing, thankfully.
Mitchell suggests that by openly taking these compounds under supervision, he and his fellow athletes are providing researchers with the data needed to discover how to optimize human health and cure subclinical fatigue.
How many of you are suffering from fatigue, low muscle mass, low strength, lack of ambition, lack of drive, irritability, because your hormones aren't clinically a problem, but they're personally a problem? But there's no way to say that for someone who is subclinically suffering from something, what can we give them to be able to optimize?
To justify the extreme physiological toll of his stack, Mitchell relies on a series of risk comparisons. He argues that the statistical mortality risk of his steroid abuse is actually lower than the dangers posed by his own morbid obesity, or by alcohol abuse and recreational drug addiction.
So it's actually less healthy for me to be 335, 340 pounds than it is for me to take performance enhancements. If we compare 80,000 deaths per year on drugs, 140,000 deaths per year with alcohol abuse, and hundreds of deaths per year from steroids, you would tend to think that maybe they're not as dangerous as they're purported to be.
To accompany his video, Mitchell made an Instagram post elaborating on these statistical justifications. Citing a 2024 JAMA study, he claimed that steroid use carries only a 2 times risk on all-cause mortality, conveniently placing it below the 2.5 times risk he attributes to his own morbid obesity.
So being morbidly obese, as I am, that's anyone with a BMI over 40, that's a 2.5x risk on all-cause mortality. I'm 2.5 times more likely to die than the guy holding the camera. It's said that steroids have an about 2 times risk on all-cause mortality. So it's actually less healthy for me to be 335, 340 pounds than it is for me to take performance enhancements.
He further used this study to declare a rough estimate that only 1 in 1,500 steroid users die every year, calculating roughly 2,000 deaths out of an estimated 3 million users to argue that the dangers of anabolic steroids are vastly overblown. Mitchell presents his chemical enhancement as a calculated, scientifically valuable endeavour that's unfairly stigmatised by a medical community that simply lacks the data that he and his enhanced companions are now willing to provide.
Part of the education is, why is this thing so stigmatized? And I want to talk about the actual numbers of this stigmatization on something that really makes very little sense to me. But without having healthy control populations studied en masse, it's impossible to really say this is where the health ends and the performance begins.
Following the initial response to his PED stack reveal, Mitchell released a follow-up video on the 7th of April 2026. In it, Mitchell doubles down on his altruistic narrative and defends his transparency as a necessary strike against bro science.
The problem is all we have is bro science. We don't really have, for young, healthy people, here's what you're supposed to do. Where do you go for this research you're talking about? Where do you go to gain the knowledge you're talking about? This is what Enhanced is starting to do.
Mitchell equates releasing his steroid protocol to documenting his 7,000 calorie diet, claiming he isn't responsible if viewers copy him.
I put out a diet video of 7,000 calories a day. Might someone be inspired to eat 7,000 calories a day and become morbidly obese like me? Maybe. I don't take responsibility for that person choosing to eat 7,000 calories a day. So just in the same way, I don't eat 7,000 calories and then tell you, you should start at 4 and then go to 6 and then go, because I don't know who I'm talking to. So I stick to, what do I do? You should talk to a doctor.
Mitchell then attempts to compare his supraphysiological hormone abuse to the safe, medically advised usage of painkillers like Advil and fentanyl.
And let's say a doctor puts a video out on fentanyl and how they use fentanyl to help sedate patients. Well, you could also say this is actually extremely negative because it normalizes fentanyl, just like I'm saying performance-enhancing drugs are a thing and they actually can have positive effects on your health if done properly, prescribed by a medical professional. One of the most dangerous substances in fentanyl, it has a safe medical use. Same thing with hormones.
As we unpack Mitchell's rhetoric in the next chapter, I'll be addressing the defenses raised in his follow-up video as well. It wasn't really news to anyone that Mitchell Hooper has a performance-enhancing drug stack, but because he decided to come clean on what would have been obvious to everyone, it's now become newsworthy. The remarkable part of the confession, however, is how Mitchell tries to spin it. What he attempts to convey in his 17-minute apologia is that he's doing the world a huge favour by taking highly toxic drugs and being candid about it. The pervasive use of illicit substances in strength sports is an open secret, but Mitchell positions himself as the singular honest participant willing to pull back the curtain. Actually, lots of veteran strength athletes and bodybuilders have come clean on their stacks. Mitchell is hardly the first, but he gets line honours for manipulating the motive, as if the confession is all about securing the safety of future generations. Mitchell takes an action that's dangerous and self-serving, the abuse of androgens to win trophies, and rebrands it as a virtuous crusade for truth. Mitchell repeatedly emphasizes that the drug habit is rotten and can't be recommended.
Right, so I can't be clear enough. Don't do this. This is not my advice to you. Of course, doubling your risk of all-cause mortality is a horrendous thing to choose to do, and you absolutely should not choose to do it. I think perfect, optimal health, right now, don't do it. I say all of this just as a rationale for why we should explore this, not as a prescription or advice that you should, because I think this is my 5th time saying it now, you shouldn't do it.
So why does he do it? Well, apparently not for himself, not for another world record, but for you, for your well-being, because his case, and that of others in the enhanced games, will be wonderfully instructive.
And that's what Enhanced is trying to do. Not for me to get a deadlift world record, but for you to improve your health, improve your energy, optimize you.
Exactly how isn't specified. I mean, it could be that folks will be informed that it's a bad idea to take PEDs because they're shown, by his example, to be dangerously toxic. Or it could be that folks will be informed that it's a good idea to take PEDs because they're shown, by his example, to be marvelously expedient. The flaw in Mitchell's logic, however, is that neither of these outcomes requires his help. We already know that steroids work, and we already know that they kill you. We have over half a century of sports history and medical literature documenting the cardiovascular consequences of supraphysiological androgen abuse. To pretend that taking a massive steroid stack is an altruistic act of scientific discovery, rather than pure athletic ambition, is disingenuous and insulting to the audience's intelligence. When Mitchell provides a detailed milligram by milligram blueprint of the toxic steroid stack that secured his title as world's strongest man, he intends for this confession to act as an intervention for aspiring teenagers contemplating massive, reckless black market cycles.
The vast majority of people who choose to take the leap and do something bad for their health, if you're an adult, whatever, but there's a lot of teenagers and very young adults who do way more of this stuff than I do. And I've always wondered how to talk about this because I think it's going to surprise you how little it actually takes when you respond well and when you're going to be one of the strongest in the world anyway.
Mitchell relies on a bleak, fatalistic assumption. His young audience is already full to the gills with juice. Pointing to bodybuilding expos, Mitchell claims, "We see every teenager in the building doing some sort of illicit substance," and later insists that all of the kids are doing it right now.
When I walk through the Olympia, I walk through the Arnold, we see every teenager in the building doing some sort of illicit substance. Who are we hiding this from? All of the kids are doing it right now.
He uses the extreme environment of the Arnold Classic to frame his mass broadcast confession as public harm reduction, hoping to show them that extreme doses aren't necessary. There are two problems with this fatherly advice. First, it artificially casts Mitchell as some kind of moderate, a modest consumer compared to reckless amateurs who might be taking more gear than he does. But Mitchell is still taking medically extreme doses, and the fact that other people are taking more than he does doesn't change that. Of course, if you compare yourself with the worst, then you get a rosy picture. It's like an alcoholic saying that, well, I only drink 2 bottles of wine per day, which is a lot less than that drunk over there, who has 5. That shouldn't reassure anyone. Second, Mitchell can't control who hears his message. It's as if he thinks he's speaking in private to a selective group of reckless teenagers already bursting at the seams with gear. But in reality, Mitchell is handing a detailed pharmacological blueprint to a general fitness audience of hundreds of thousands of clean, natural lifters. His declaration of, "I think it's going to surprise you how little it takes when you respond well,"
Because I think it's going to surprise you how little it actually takes when you respond well,
is an irresponsible thing to say in a public forum. For the uninitiated, hearing that the absolute pinnacle of human strength requires surprisingly little pharmacology when you respond well acts as a sales pitch, providing an ambitious teenager with all the encouragement they need to take the plunge. Let's pay close attention to that caveat, "when you respond well." How exactly is a young lifter supposed to know if they respond well to androgens? There's only one way to find out. Take the drugs and measure the outcome. It's really tempting to find out. Why, you could be a genetic hyperresponder. Mitchell effectively invites you to take the gamble. And what happens when you take the plunge and discover that you aren't a hyperresponder? Do you gracefully abandon your championship dreams, or do you do what many other ambitious athletes would do? aggressively up the dose to bridge the genetic gap. It looks as if Mitchell exhorts people to moderation, but his applause for how little it takes when you respond well has the effect of luring hopefuls with the promise of a light dose, and inevitably drives the non-responders straight into the massive chemical abuse he purports to be preventing. Mitchell tries to insulate himself by littering the video with admissions that the habit is horrendous and telling his audience, "Don't do this, this isn't my advice to you." But dropping a boilerplate, "Don't try this at home," right before listing your exact milligram dosages renders the warning completely hollow. Mitchell acts as both the high priest of how to abuse steroids effectively and the Pontius Pilate who washes his hands of the responsibility through superficial verbal disclaimers. In his follow-up video, Mitchell argues that, just as he isn't responsible if someone copies his 7,000 calorie diet and becomes obese, he isn't responsible if someone copies his drug cycle. But compare the way he talks about these two subjects. When Mitchell discusses his 7,000 calorie diet, he's unequivocal about the dangers of extreme overeating. He frames morbid obesity as an objective biological hazard and an independent variable for all-cause mortality with no redeeming health qualities. His warning is absolute.
And I believe the health consequence of that is substantial and negative and almost irrefutable. Regardless of your level of exercise, health, fitness, it's an independent variable for all-cause mortality.
But when Mitchell talks about his steroid protocol, he goes out of his way to emphasize that anabolic drugs mightn't be as dangerous as they're purported to be.
You would tend to think that maybe they're not as dangerous as they're purported to be.
He dangles the genetic carrot of how surprisingly little it takes when you respond well.
Because I think it's going to surprise you how little it actually takes when you respond well.
He attempts to launder the toxicity of his stack by pointing to potential therapeutic, health-optimizing applications.
Let's keep people healthy. And yes, performance-enhancing drugs can actually be medical interventions. They're not necessarily performance-enhancing, they are health-optimizing.
And concludes that supraphysiological hormone abuse exists in a medical grey area.
But this is such a dark area, such a grey area, such an area where we need more exposure, more evidence, more studies, more research, more evidence.
Because of this, equating his dietary transparency with his chemical transparency is deceptive. Mitchell's discussion of his excessive food intake is a genuine cautionary tale. However, his discussion of his anabolic steroid stack, padded with promises of biological optimization, manageable risks, and genetic hyperresponders, that functions as a sales pitch. He says he's not responsible for anyone copying him, and maybe he isn't in the sense that individuals have to take responsibility for their own actions, but that doesn't mean that he should be irresponsible in touting his stack. Mitchell is a role model after all, and when you combine his announcement with all the justifications and the supposed benefits to future medical science, he might want to own some of the fallout when people feel encouraged as a result of watching his video. When Mitchell eventually attempts to defend the relative safety of his arsenal of needles and pills, he falls into the fallacy of relative privation. He compares the dangers of his steroid abuse to other forms of drug and alcohol abuse to insist that the steroids are far less dangerous.
If we compare 80,000 deaths per year on drugs, 140,000 deaths per year with alcohol abuse, and hundreds of deaths per year from steroids.
Mitchell's argument here has no force. The fallacy of relative privation attempts to minimize a specific harm by pointing to a supposedly greater harm elsewhere. The fact that chronic alcoholism destroys the liver and kills hundreds of thousands of people doesn't magically render 750 milligrams of testosterone and daily doses of oral steroids biologically safe. Mitchell seems to have realized the weakness of this argument, partially walking back the alcohol comparison in his follow-up video.
One thing I don't want to do though is enter the hierarchy and say, well, PEDs are not as bad as this, so you should do them. It's like, it's playing so far below the line. I think context is important and understanding, like, where does this lie in the realm of things? But just because something is less bad, it doesn't make it not bad.
However, he immediately replaced it with a new fallacy, comparing his drug stack to fentanyl and Advil, He argues that because these dangerous drugs have safe clinical applications, his hormones might too. This is a classic bait and switch. No rational critic is arguing against a doctor prescribing moderate TRT for a legitimate deficiency. But Mitchell isn't running clinical HRT. He's pushing extreme multi-compound dosages to win trophies. A doctor safely administering microdosed fentanyl in an ICU doesn't justify Mitchell broadcasting a massive black market steroid stack on YouTube. For all his rationalizations, Mitchell is to steroids what a junkie is to fentanyl. An abuser. He's neither a doctor nor a patient. In his video, Mitchell casually throws out the metric of hundreds of deaths per year from steroids.
And hundreds of deaths per year from steroids.
However, in his follow-up Instagram post, the very 2024 JAMA study he cites as supporting evidence actually contradicts what he's saying. On his Instagram, Mitchell declares that this paper supports a rough estimate that only 1 in 1,500 steroid users die every year, which he calculates as roughly 2,000 deaths out of an estimated 3 million users. Mitchell's homespun interpretation is a colossal misrepresentation of the data. At no point did the researchers calculate a national annual death toll or invent a sanitized 1 in 1,500 mortality rate. What they actually found, after tracking a cohort of men with a mean age of just 27.4 years, was a hazard ratio of 2.81. This means that the young men using steroids were nearly 3 times as likely to die compared to the healthy control group during the 11-year follow-up period. The study also confirmed that among the natural deaths in the steroid cohort, the most prevalent causes were cardiovascular disease and cancer. Mitchell literally cited a study suggesting that steroids accelerate fatal heart disease in young men, and somehow interpreted it to mean that his drug protocol is relatively safe. When you apply a nearly 200% increased mortality risk to Mitchell's own estimate of millions of users, you're looking at a massive chronic public health crisis. Mitchell also attempts to compare the acute, easily trackable overdoses of recreational drugs to the chronic, silent, and structurally compounding organ damage caused by performance-enhancing drugs. The two metrics have no common measure. When a 45-year-old strength athlete succumbs to fatal heart disease, the medical examiners rarely write anabolic steroid abuse on the death certificate. The fatalities are reported as coronary failure, left ventricular hypertrophy, atherosclerosis, or stroke. The etiology of the cardiac event is only recorded by its immediate physiological manifestation, rather than sheeted home to the decades of unregulated tissue-building drugs that caused the underlying structural damage to the heart. Mitchell points out that being morbidly obese with a BMI over 40 carries a 2.5 times mortality risk. To make his central thesis work, that his massive body weight is actually the greater threat to his life, he takes that 2.81 hazard ratio from the JAMA study and casually shaves it down to a 2 times risk, so that it neatly slots underneath his obesity.
So being morbidly obese, as I am, that's anyone with a BMI over 40, that's a 2.5x risk on all-cause mortality. I'm 2.5 times more likely to die than the guy holding the camera just because of my body weight. If we talk about steroids, it's said that steroids have about 2 times risk on all-cause mortality. So it's actually less healthy for me to be 335, 340 pounds than it is for me to take performance enhancements.
Besides understating the risk, this treats steroid abuse as a monolith. The mortality data Mitchell points to track average users, many of whom are running basic amateur cycles. Steroid toxicity is heavily dose-dependent, and Mitchell isn't your average juicer. He's running an elite world's strongest man protocol, pushing over 2 grams of anabolics a week. His personal risk profile is much higher than the average user in those epidemiological studies. Comparing these two hazards, morbid obesity and steroid abuse, side by side also distracts from the fact that Mitchell is doing both, and biological hazards compound. Forcing a cardiovascular system that's already struggling to pump blood through 335 pounds of mass simultaneously to process extreme doses of cardiotoxic compounds acts as a lethal force multiplier. Far from choosing a safer path, Mitchell is stacking chemical toxicity on top of extreme mechanical strain. Mitchell is creating a perfect storm for left ventricular failure, all while butchering the literature to make the drugs feel like a secondary issue. As if to shore up his fragile narrative of how socially useful the enhanced games are, Mitchell exaggerates the ignorance of the medical community. He suggests that the medical consequences of anabolic drugs are unknown.
And that's where this gray area comes in, of when is this healthy and when is this unhealthy, and frankly at the moment we don't really know.
Since when don't we know? Which endocrinologist is in doubt and is now regretting their previous advice? Endocrinology and cardiology aren't blank slates waiting for strongmen to inscribe their wisdom on the tablets with their used needles. The medical community knows precisely what happens when the human body is subjected to supraphysiological levels of androgens. It results in dyslipidemia, withering HDL cholesterol, severe hypertension, the thickening of the left ventricular wall, and dangerous polycythemia. Mitchell somehow ignores decades of established science regarding cardiovascular degradation to pretend he's stepping into a medically ambiguous frontier. In his follow-up video, Mitchell doubles down on this manufactured ignorance, complaining that the field is a wild west because we lack peer-reviewed journals on optimal performance-enhancing stacks, leaving lifters to rely on bro science.
So we don't have good knowledge, we don't have good evidence. It's the Wild West. And I think what you have to accept if you get on it is that it is the Wild West. You're playing with fire unless it's medically prescribed by a doctor. All we have is bro science. We don't really have, for young, healthy people, here's what you're supposed to do.
But the absence of a clinical how-to guide for a World's Strongest Man cycle isn't because doctors are ignorant. It's because medical review boards don't approve clinical trials for lethal dosages of illicit drugs for the sake of athletic entertainment. Mitchell mistakes a rigid ethical boundary for some kind of medical mystery. Mitchell effectively uses this manufactured ignorance to propose that his participation in the enhanced games is poised to make a contribution to medical science.
How do we weigh up these consequences? How do we weigh up these the outcomes of doing this? And at the moment, there really is no way, other than regular blood work and monitoring, but there's no way to say that for someone who is subclinically suffering from something, what can we give them to be able to optimize them? That question can be answered if you have a research study with participants, which is what Enhance is doing, thankfully.
This framing induces upon Mitchell and his peers the air of being subject in a clinical trial. In reality, the instances of drug use in this environment are chaotic. The athletes are using varying, self-selected stacks of compounds from different sources, combining them with radically different diets, extreme body weights, and intense physical stresses. Scientific standardization in this gung-ho environment would be very hard to achieve. It'd be hard to introduce double-blind controls and standardized dosing protocols. Just because athletes are finally being honest about their toxic stacks doesn't mean their reckless behavior suddenly yields valuable medical insights. Sports people are medicating with whatever they can get away with. Even though Mitchell explains the etiquette of what's allowed and what's not allowed, you still have an uncontrolled mess. You have a high-stakes physiological gamble that some people engage in because they rate their safety as less important than the trophies they hope to win. I don't see how this dance with danger can masquerade as some kind of proto-science that ultimately promises greater health for the general public. Even if there are things that we don't perfectly understand in a highly specific niche application of pharmacology, it doesn't justify abandoning the foundational medical ethic of doing no harm, experimenting with cocktails of halotestin, anadrol, NPP, and excessive testosterone under the banner of finding a hypothetical optimization threshold is clinically reckless. Mitchell's video rationalizes something foolish as if it yields something sage. In fact, it yields nothing sage and only promotes something foolish. The deeper problem is that we have a man, the strongest man in the world, who says things not because they're true or logical or meaningful, but because they're convenient. Is there anything Mitchell won't say if it benefits him? He disowns his own qualifications and those of everyone else in the fitness industry because along comes Solomon and says, I think a PhD thesis ought to be a bit better than Mike Israetel's. Nonsense. A PhD can be as mediocre as you like, or whatever you think it should be, because they just add word salad to your name anyway that testifies to nothing. I struggle to figure out what makes Mitchell tick. I can see what animates Mike Israetel. His swagger, his wit, his chutzpah, his enthusiasm, his theatricality. But what about Mitchell? He's so keen to tell us that he's doing the right thing, but it's all precarious and dubious. Even his catchphrase puzzles me. Lift heavy, be kind. Well, thank goodness it doesn't say, lift heavy, be mean and nasty. And it sounds a lot better than saying, lift light, be kind. I mean, I suppose it's said in the same spirit as live, laugh, love, or some other kind of cliche. But I can't get past the feeling that there's a kind of sanctimonious claim in there, as if it's to suggest that Mitchell himself practices what he preaches. Mitchell certainly lifts heavy, there's no doubt about that, but I don't know about the kind part. Mitchell admitted that my critique of Mike Israetel's PhD thesis made his blood boil.
This absolutely has my blood boiling.
If a simple video essay provokes that kind of hormone-fueled emotional volatility, then you have to wonder how deep his kindness really runs. I couldn't tell you, but perhaps Ashley Hooper can. Lift heavy, be kind. I get it. I, Mitchell Hooper, am now recognized as the best in the world at lifting heavy. Well, that's all well and good. But how can I add sentimental value to my athletic prowess? Let's just tack on, be kind. Simple. It has nothing to do with lifting, but let's just tack it on anyway so that my athletic practice gains a moral and spiritual glow. Mitchell's entire persona is structured around virtue signaling. Lift heavy, be kind perfectly encapsulates it. It's an empty exhortation, but it lets Mitchell position himself as a holy Joe. The same Mitchell who has a master's degree, yet boasts of contempt for academic qualifications. The same Mitchell who promotes the fabulous efficiency of steroid abuse, yet warns against following his example. The same Mitchell who pretends that taking toxic chemicals is good for the world. I can't give Mitchell any advice about lifting heavy, but he'd do us a kindness by dropping the posturing that he's doing it for anyone but himself.
Hey, Solomon Nelson, we're training at 3 o'clock today, and you said, oh my gosh, we're gonna train. Okay, cool. We do that for a week, and then next week you don't show up. Now I'm gonna be pissed.